I see we're at 31. I'm gonna give it 2 more minutes and we start at 9:05. So just 2 more minutes and then we start at 9:05 with colleagues that will be in the room. Welcome everyone.
Hi, Marlene. This is Shruti from the Trust Fund. Hope you're well. I'm just checking in if you can hear me okay, and if you could confirm that someone will be pulling up the slides, or I'm happy to do it.
Yes, I can hear you, Shruti, and we will be putting up the slides. We got them last night.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
All right, great. Okay, I think we are going to start now. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Molin Marume, and I'm the thematic lead for the Action Coalition on GBV. A very warm welcome, afternoon, good morning. Sorry, I'm in Nairobi, so it's afternoon. Good morning, good evening from wherever you are. Really glad that you managed to join us this afternoon, this morning from wherever you are. The community of practice has long been in the making. We have been talking about this for the past few months. And finally, we are starting our first session today. And I just wanted to share that this is still learning. We're still very flexible. And we will see from how this session goes, and we can always readjust it as and how participants feel it should be adjusted. This is our first session, and we are launching it today. So I don't know if Calliope is in the room. She had some meetings, so I don't know if she managed to join. Okay, I don't see Calliope in the room. So in the interest of time, I think I'm just gonna go ahead. Really welcome to everyone, and I really do want to acknowledge the government of Catalonia. I don't know if they're in the room. We wouldn't have been able to launch and establish this community of practice without the government of Catalonia. Oh, I see Berta is here. Really, many, many thanks. And we are so glad finally we are really putting this into practice and actually having our community of practice. So we're really grateful for the support. So the session today, the way we are doing it, so we are launching it. So I guess this is kind of like the launch. The government of Catalonia wasn't able to speak today, so we hope in the next meetings they'll be able to speak. The colleagues on the online are going to share with you a registration form. You can just put in your name, and we essentially wanted to know, and I'm so glad we are now 41. So we essentially wanted to know if you are a commitment maker, if you're a leader, if you are part of a collective commitment, and your name and your details, so that at least we know and we can be following up easily. So this session today, the launch which we have done, and then we are going to discuss, we're discussing scaling up of GBV prevention. This is following up from the survey we did in December when we asked participants, I think we had about 65 respondents, when we're asking what it is that colleagues would want to know, what it is participants would be interested in knowing. And I think somewhere at the end of this session, we're going to ask again in terms of what are your priorities? What is it that you would want to learn in case that has changed? And in terms of GBV prevention, so for those probably that may not know, but I think we have shared this with a lot of commitment makers and the leaders. The Action Coalition on GBV has 17 leaders and more than 400 commitment makers. And with all of us, we have more than 700 commitments that have been made by all the commitment makers. And out of these, almost 290 plus, almost 300 are just focusing on GBV prevention. This is why GBV prevention is really such a huge deal when it comes to the work that the commitment makers and the leaders are doing when it comes to the Action Coalition on GBV. So within this community of practice, we want to make it, we didn't want to make it as usual, like a normal webinar. We wanted to really make it something learning, where we are learning and we're listening. And it's a space for peer learning, and to highlight that this community of practice is to facilitate knowledge generation. So there's a lot of work that commitment makers and leaders are doing in your different spaces, and we really want to know and to start collating and documenting this so that we can build the practice-based knowledge on GBV prevention based on what commitment makers and leaders are doing. And you will see in this session, we've invited a lot of commitment makers. So we're going to have various leaders and commitment makers talking about the work that they are doing in their various spaces, looking at the three thematic areas that we are looking at. So this space is also, we're trying to give a space where leaders and commitment makers can interact. There's been a lot of interaction with the leaders, and we haven't had as much interaction between the two groups, the leaders and the commitment makers. And we're trying to create this space for leaders and commitment makers to be able to interact, collaborate, and partner and form partnerships as we go along. And again, just to highlight, as we go forward, one of the things, so apart from the discussions that we're going to have until the end of the year, we'll have another 3 learning circles. We also have monthly discussion boards, and this is why I think we're encouraging everyone to register on the Shine platform. We have sent the steps on how to register onto the Shine platform, and I hope everybody has seen that. And we really do encourage you to join, because every month, so after this session, we're going to take the notes from this session, and then we're going to have a discussion board around what came out of this session. And then that can be, so every month there'll be discussion board, and we have a facilitator, Elizabeth LaRue, who will be coming in at least for a few hours to then be interacting with everyone, with participants during the discussion board. So in terms of, again, interpretation, I should have said this in the beginning. So interpretation is there, the little globe. I think we have French and Spanish interpretation. You can be listening in any of those languages. Again, the registration form, I think, has been put in the link in the chat for you to register. In terms of the objectives of this session, we're going to look at 3 thematic areas. We hope we'll have enough time to at least interrogate and also have discussions, which is basically what we wanted more than anything, to have discussions and hear from everyone. We'll be examining the evidence-based strategies to prevent GBV. What is the evidence that is out there? Also exploring GBV prevention efforts in different sectors. How do we integrate GBV prevention in different sectors? We have colleagues that are going to be speaking about education sector, health sector, and the media. And then we're also going to be interrogating pathways to transforming patriarchal masculinities for GBV prevention. So those are the 3 areas. I've switched them up a bit. We will start with the GBV prevention, and then we'll go to transforming patriarchal masculinities, I think, because our member state, Iceland, had said they will not be able to stay for long. So I put masculinities in the second session, and then we'll finish with the session on integrating GBV in different sectors. So what we want to understand today, really, what does this evidence say? We listen to the practical examples that partners are doing in their different spaces. We'll learn a little bit more about the respect framework. And then we're here to really understand what leaders are doing and then encourage each other. So I think one of the things we wanted to understand before we start is basically to hear from everyone. What is your expectation? Just one word. I'm going to share a slide. I think I shared it before earlier on. I'm going to share a slide link where we would really just invite everyone to come in and just let us know one word that can describe how you want, what you think. So I'm going to share it. Sorry. There we go. 1 minute. Technology is a bit of okay. All right, there we go. So if you can just one word to describe your expectations from this Action Coalition on GBV community of practice. What is it that you would expect to see? So please let me know if you can see the question from your end. Do I need to send the code or is there? Okay. So I see one person typing. So yeah, it's visible. Thank you. So I think as we are typing, I will show the results in terms of what are the words that are coming out, because it's really important to us to understand what it is that you expect, or at least what you expect to learn or to hear from this community of practice. So as we continue with that, I will present the results as we go. I would like to invite, I think, our first panelist. We have a number of panelists that will be speaking. Some of them are leaders. I will start with WHO Avni, if you're in. WHO is one of the leaders of the Action Coalition on GBV. And if Avni is in the room, I think she's there. So Avni, maybe I can start with you in terms of for others. I do know we have spoken a lot about the respect framework. Maybe if you could share what the respect framework is, what evidence do we have to show that the respect framework is crucial for GBV prevention? And if you can share a little bit about the implementation framework, and then if we can start with that. So I see Avni has a presentation, so over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
And you can see the screen?
And we can see the screen, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Maureen. I'm going to share with you the respect framework and the evidence base for prevention of violence against women. I think we all know, that prevalence of violence against women remains high. It has largely remained unchanged in the last decade or so. But at the same time, the knowledge that violence against women is preventable and evidence of promising interventions has actually expanded. So in that sense, we now know much more about what are effective approaches or promising approaches to prevent violence against women. So in 2019, with UN Women, WHO developed the respect framework, and I'll walk you through what that is. I'm just showing you that the framework is available in multiple UN languages, and it was endorsed by 12 other UN and multilateral and bilateral agencies. And in 2024, so 5 years later, we are in the process of updating this framework with evidence that has emerged in the last 5 years. This framework is largely for policymakers, and it is really aimed at helping policymakers scale up effective approaches for prevention. The way we have structured respect is a series of 10 steps that policymakers can go through in a systematic way to actually build a prevention approach that is evidence-based. And the 10 steps are outlined here on the right-hand side, which starts from knowing your data on violence against women, knowing the local risk and protective factors, and looking at which of the 7 strategies of respect are implementable and should be or could be implemented in the local context, assessing which of the interventions or programs are effective, developing a theory of change, being mindful and applying the guiding principles for prevention, ensuring that there's an enabling environment with money, budget, investments in women's rights organizations, and a policy framework for scaling up prevention, and then adapting and scaling up what works based on gradual expansion or replication or coverage of effective programs based on constant monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So those are the 10 steps. Now, the 7 strategies that are behind respect. The first one, which stands for R, is relationship skill strengthening. The E is for interventions that empower women. The S is the services for survivors The P is for poverty reduction interventions. The E is for work, school, public spaces made safe. The C is for preventing child and adolescent abuse. And the T stands for transformation of gender norms, beliefs, and attitudes. So that is how respect is sort of the mnemonic of respect. We hope that people remember it as these 7 strategies for prevention. What we did then is, for each of the 7 strategies, we identified interventions that lie behind these types of strategies and tried to assess the evidence, the quality of evidence, and to see whether these evidence interventions have worked in more than one setting, whether they have worked in high-income countries or in low and middle-income countries, and whether we actually are showing reductions not just in attitudes and knowledge, but actually in behaviors. Because ultimately, you want to make sure that these interventions are not just changing knowledge and attitudes, but are making an impact on reductions of violence. So that's how we arrived at these categorizations of what is effective or promising, and we color-coded them. So the H is for interventions that have been shown to work or not work in high-income countries, and the L is for LMICs. So in the relationship skill strengthening, for example, there are 2 types of interventions. One is group-based workshops with women and men, and the other is couples counseling. And we can see that group-based workshops are promising in LMICs, but couples counseling and couples therapy is more promising in high-income countries, and that's just because of the way the interventions have been implemented. When you look at empowerment of women, which is the E, you will see that empowerment training along with life skills and safe spaces and mentoring is very promising in LMICs, but not so much in high-income countries. And it's again because that's the nature of the way interventions have been implemented. And then if I just move all the way across the respect framework to the T, which is transformation of gender norms, attitudes, and beliefs, what you will see is community mobilization interventions are again very promising in reducing violence in low and middle income country settings. Whereas group-based workshops and social marketing or edutainment still need more evidence that they are actually effective in changing behaviors. Not that they don't change knowledge and awareness, but that's not enough to actually qualify as an effective intervention if it doesn't change behaviors in the end. So that's the evidence base that is provided to policymakers on how to consider which interventions to look at and adapt to their own particular context. So finally, what we did is we packaged everything, including the respect implementation framework, into a one-stop dedicated website that is co-managed or co-owned by 4 UN agencies: UNDP, UNFPA, UN Women, and WHO. And it provides a one-stop shop really for all the information, evidence, tools, implementation guidance, manuals, etc., related to respect. So here's one interface of the website. So we break it down for each of the strategies. And we not only give you the 2 overarching interventions, but the evidence behind it, and then give some program examples by country and regions where they've been implemented, so that policymakers can dig deeper into each of these and the evidence base behind them. And here what we've done is, as part of the 2024 update, we have done a systematic review that has actually looked at the respect framework interventions and updated it to show where we are now compared to 5 years ago in terms of the strength of the evidence and the volume of the studies that we have. And again, what you see here is maximum number of studies are still focusing on services, but we are beginning to see, particularly in low and middle income countries with a green, light green circle, more and more interventions showing promising results from low and middle income countries. And that's where you see these mid-sized bubbles showing that they are that there is quite a growing burgeoning amount of evidence behind some of these strategies around transformation of gender norms. So how does this now translate into collective commitment for GBV Action Coalition? So we all of us who've been working on the respect framework, we said, look, can we agree to a collective commitment to scale up evidence-driven prevention strategies in at least 25 high violence against women prevalence countries, and to be guided by the respect framework, because that gives us a target, a clear target. It gives us a package of interventions that we can work with ministries, with civil society, with implementing partners to guide them through a more evidence-driven approach. And it helps us maybe track, how these things are progressing over time. So here are some of the countries where we've been doing these workshops to guide people using the Respect Implementation Guide. We've done them in Bhutan, Nigeria, Vietnam, Bolivia, Brazil, Sri Lanka. And we've also made sure that this framework is now embedded into the country guidance issued by the US government, USAID, and the World Bank as the basis for their funding of GBV prevention at scale. And here on the website, you will see some examples of how respect has been implemented in some of these countries with some more details. In terms of tracking progress and monitoring commitments, in 2021, WHO put out a policies database survey, which shows how countries are including violence against women in their health and multi-sectoral policies. And one of the areas we tracked was interventions that are in respect. So we tracked 3 intervention areas. One is community mobilization, which is part of the T of respect. The second is group education, which is part of the R of respect or the T of respect. And then we track services. And what we found is that across the regions, only less than 40% at this point of countries actually include community mobilization and group education in their multi-sectoral action plans on with respect to evidence-based respect strategies. And very few actually include both community mobilization and group education. So in a way, this data provides a measure of accountability to actually track progress over time, to see how countries are actually including respect strategies in their national commitments and action plans. And then hopefully over time, we'll be able to also see if they're able to provide some details on whether there are budgetary allocations to actually scale up evidence-based prevention at scale. So I'll stop here. Over.
Thank you so much, Avni. I think I will just go on to the next presentation. Can I ask participants if you do have any questions, if you just note them down, and then we'll be done with the panelists in this session. And then we can then come into a Q&A session. So if Shruti, I saw you came in, and Johanna, if you can share the PowerPoint from Shruti. So Shruti is from the UN Trust Fund, and I think a lot of you have worked with the UN Trust Fund or come across the Trust Fund. So basically, I think for you, we do know that the Trust Fund has been documenting practice-based knowledge from civil society organizations that you fund quite a lot, especially women's rights organizations, on the prevention of violence against women and girls in the prevention series. Can you tell us a little bit more about this series? How did it come about and what has been documented thus far? Over to you, Shruti.
Great. Thank you, Marlene. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Shruti, and I will be talking a little bit, as Marlene said, about the work that the Trust Fund has been doing on really documenting, together with our grantee partners, who are mostly civil society organizations from across the globe, on what is some of the sort of practice-based knowledge that's coming out on prevention. Next slide, please. Even before I jump into the sort of work we've done on prevention, just to give a little bit of a background on who we are. I think most of us are familiar with the Trust Fund, but we are an interagency grant-making entity. We've been around since 1996, and since 1996, we've been supporting civil society organizations, particularly women's rights organizations and smaller grassroots organizations across the globe who are working on this mandate of ending violence against women. Over the last almost 30 years, we've supported 670 initiatives across 140 countries and territories. Now, just to say a little bit about, the focus areas that we work on, we are a demand-driven grant-making entity that broadly does grant-making around these three specific focus areas, which is prevention of violence against women and girls, which is a majority of our portfolio, on improving access to multi-sectoral services, and then on implementation of laws, policies, and national action plans. Now, one of the things you can imagine about the trust fund, if you can imagine for a second what our archive looks like over the last 30 years, having supported so many civil society organizations in English, French, and Spanish, each of these organizations submit a 6-monthly monitoring report, which is a detailed monitoring report on their progress, on what's working, what's not working, what are some challenges, what are some opportunities. And over the duration of their 3-year grant, they submit, therefore, 6 progress reports and a final evaluation report. So each of our organizations are producing anywhere between 200 to 300 pages worth of really important documentation on the practice of prevention of violence against women and girls, of access to services, etc. So just to give you a visual of what the archive really looks like in these 3 different languages, and one of the challenges we really sort of took on 5 years ago is how do we then really understand what is coming out on prevention. Let's start with the first focus area, right? Let's start with prevention, but how do we start to then document this very important practitioner's knowledge on prevention of violence against women and girls? So if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what we did is, the final output was a series of 10 papers, which was called the Prevention Series. And this was really a co-production between the Trust Fund, external researchers, and 70+ civil society organizations that came together and documented this series. This was really produced in consultation with multiple other practitioners, 2,500+ practitioners, actually, in English, French, Spanish, Arabic, and Russian. And what we wanted to do, and was really critical, is to put this knowledge in conversation with the evidence base on war prevention. So the evidence base being exactly what Avni presented, the respect framework, with what are we really learning on the what works, and complementing that with the how of prevention. And for the purposes of this series, we really took inspiration from Raising Voices definition. Raising Voices is a wonderful grantee partner for us and really well known in this field. We really took inspiration from their definition of practice-based knowledge, which is now evolving into practice-based learning, being defined as the cumulative knowledge and learning acquired by practitioners from designing and implementing and actually doing these projects in diverse contexts and programs. Next slide, please. I mean, in this one, of course, it doesn't need to be said, but why focus on practice-based knowledge is, as I said, we really do see it, in these archives, in our day-to-day work as a donor, we really do see the practitioner's knowledge as a really key resource and a complementary knowledge base to the existing research in the field of eval. So it is the how to the what, it is the process to the impact. Right? But what we also wanted to really do through this series of work is amplify the very unique contributions of civil society organizations, particularly women's rights organizations, in preventing violence against women and girls, and advocate for their increased and sustained funding on this basis. So what I'll try to do very quickly in a couple of minutes, next slide please, is give a bit of an overview on how we put it together, and then I will leave the QR code for the series towards the end, so that those who are here can access the series. But to just say a little bit about the methodology, because one thing we do believe along with our practitioners is the process of documenting is as important as the outcome. So one thing we often get asked is, how did we decide on these 10 themes? Very much came inductively. So back in 2020, we spent a few months just doing a deep dive into the archive, taking a sample of monitoring and evaluation reports, and doing a rapid review using NVivo, and doing a rapid coding of what are the most salient themes that are coming out from the archive. So if we forget what we know about prevention and really just look at the archive and see what is most frequently talked about, what are the themes that are then coming up? A set of 20 themes came up, which we then consulted extensively with 250 plus grantees in conversation with them. We looked at those themes together and arrived at the 10 most salient themes that came up in the archive. Next slide, please. The 10 themes that sort of came up inductively from the archives are the ones that you see on the screen. And there are a wide variety of themes, right? It came, one of the most important ones, for example, was there was a lot of conversation and practice-based knowledge around how do you really mobilize women and take them from beneficiaries to really be agents of change as part of prevention programs. How do you engage faith-based and traditional actors within prevention programs? What does it mean to really apply an intersectional lens to prevention programs? What does resistance and backlash really look like? This is one of our most downloaded papers, the 9th one that you see on the screen. How do you really program for resistance and backlash, given that so many grantee organizations are facing these in multiple overt and passive ways in their different contexts? How do they program for it? How do they really mitigate some of the risks ahead? How do they reframe, rethink their strategies? And the last one that really came up quite a bit is, how do they adapt? It's no coincidence that this came up quite a lot, because we did this in 2020 and for 3-4 years after. So COVID was a big piece within this. So adaptive programming within prevention also came up quite a bit. The other thing I want to say, that the messy lines that you see on the screen is not coincidence. It is quite intentional. One of the things that came up is these are not isolated. These are not isolated themes. They very much coexist. They are cross-cutting, but also the pathway towards prevention then is quite a messy one. It's not a linear one. Hence why the crisscross. Next slide, please. Once we arrived at these 10 themes, the writing of the 10 themes also took on it took quite some time. But partly what we were trying to do is, rather than having a single researcher write it, we paired one researcher with 10 practitioners for each of these themes. And so each of these 10 papers is then co-produced by one researcher, 10 practitioners. And it is a deep dive into the full archive again, then drawing out what is coming out on each of these themes. It is a documentation of those 10 practitioners who had a lot to say on those particular themes. But again, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's also a documentation in each of these papers of how is the practice-based knowledge then in conversation with the evidence on that particular topic, right? There is a lot that has been said about engaging faith leaders, doing community mobilization, etc. And this was really done through conversation, focus group discussions, etc. And then a final phase, next slide, please. A final phase of this work was, we also wanted to, once documented, put this out in the world. So we did do a webinar series for each of these 10 different themes. We did consultations on our knowledge platform in 50 different languages on Shine, which is a knowledge platform that all of you know about already, and will be hopefully signing up on for this community of practice. We also did a series of podcasts on each of these themes. One of the things we heard a lot during COVID is there is a reading fatigue. So are there ways of producing audio formats, more accessible formats for some of this knowledge? So we did a series of a podcast series as well in each of these papers, and then a final synthesis review that pulls together the key recommendations that are coming from practitioners on prevention into one final document. I'll stop there. I just wanted to give in the last slide a bit of huge gratitude for the organizations that were part of this journey. This wasn't just the Trust Fund, of course, and the researchers, but all of these organizations that you see on the screen were very much part of it. And then on the last slide, you will see also the QR code for the prevention series. And Johanna, if you could hit play on the blank heart, that would be lovely. These are the voices of the practitioners. I don't know if we can hear it, but it's a quick 30-second of the podcast and the voices. Johanna, is there a way to get the audio on that?
Let me share it again with the audio.
And if not, no worries, and thank you so much.
Okay. Are you sharing the audio?
Talk about the roots of violence against women.
It's about changing the mindset.
What is sort of the legacy and the trajectory, the consequences of that violence?
What do we teach our boys and what do we teach our girls to make them aware from the young age that they are equal?
Welcome to Pathways to Prevention, a podcast series produced by the UN Trust Fund to end violence against women.
Thank you so much, Shruti. I think that's really been eye-opening. I think the presentations from the two of you, from Shruti, from Avni, they also do link very much with the 4 priority action areas for the Action Coalition on GBV, which is law reform, policy and law reform, prevention, which is our action area 2, 3 on essential services, and then investment into women's rights organizations. And again, I think from the Slido, if I can just share, this is what we got from the Slido. We have a lot of, sorry, there we go. In terms of so the big thing I think that we're getting is learning that we have had, I think, about 15 respondents, and learning, sharing knowledge and support. And I'm glad we are getting to that. This is where we're getting in terms of what we are showing. So can I just ask if there are any questions? We do have the 2 experts in the room. We have Avni, we have Shruti. If you have any questions, anything that you do want to ask around the presentations, or if you want to share a little bit of what you are doing, we can have some interventions to come in now. I don't see any hand. You should be able to raise your hands. Okay, I don't see any hands. Maybe if I can ask the room, based on what the presentations that we have had, probably building on what has been shared, what would you see, or what would you say is, crucial to making GBV prevention more effective and impactful? What is that one thing or the 2 things that, you really would be watching out for within your spaces? And I know a lot of us, a lot of the organizations in the room, a lot of the stakeholders in the room are doing GBV prevention in different spaces. What is it that you see is or if there are any questions you do want to ask, I think this would be the time to ask when, and we will share the presentations that both Avni and Shruti presented. We'll be sharing that with the notes after this meeting. I think if you just register your name, we have your email address, we will share this afterwards. So I don't want to go into my speaking, so I want to hear from you. I see Catherine, please go ahead. Just introduce yourself, from which organization, and then you can ask your question.
Hi, good morning. My name is Catherine Silis. I am from Raise Your Voice St. Lucia. It's a non-profit. We work with women and children who are victims of gender-based violence and lack of access to justice. So our work focuses on support services and policy advocacy. So to your question, I find one of the most effective strategies we have used is training of frontline social services agency workers, including people from the family court, the district court, the emergency rooms, police officers who are taking reports, and fire service people because they are first responders, teachers, nurses who work at community level. We find that we did training on the small grant we got from Spotlight, and we find that has been very effective. We have not been receiving the level of complaints we usually get when people go and make a report and look for services from November last year. And we believe that training of the people who are providing the services what actually works.
Okay. So I get this is a comment on what you have been doing in St. Lucia, which is very good. And I hand over to Marina. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much. Very important, timely, and really comprehensive conversation. I represent Vital Voices Global Partnerships. I'm a vice president of gender-based violence prevention at Vital Voices. And we work globally, and we do have different kind of programs. We have Urgent Assistance Fund that goes directly to survivors of GBV through organizations that provide services. We work with multi-stakeholder approach on training, policy change, etc. I think with everything we are doing at the moment, we need to really see how the backlash, and especially the backlash that is framed as a traditional value backlash, how it actually affects the situation both for survivors but also for activists who work on the ground. It's just not like creating obstacles and reverting the laws like FGM laws or in Africa, or decriminalizing domestic violence in Russia. It's also putting in more danger activists who work on the ground, and they have to figure out the framework in which they can continue operating. So I think if we can think about approaches, how we can really continue that conversation, but also, put more pressure on governments in compliance with CEDAR, with the definition of harmful practices, etc. That would be one also super important to me aspect of current work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Marina. And I think it's really good that Shruti, in part of her presentation, she did mention this is one of the areas of the 10 areas I think that came about in the knowledge-based the knowledge-based practices around resistance and backlash. And we do see quite a lot of that, not only on the FGM and in Russia and in Argentina now, they are literally closing off the Ministry of Gender in that particular. So that kind of backlash, and how do we navigate with all the work that we need to do when we're facing all those kinds, it's not textbook and it's changing environment all the time. How do we navigate our way through that, and how do we, program better for, to serve the women and girls that we are working with and that we're trying to serve and make a better life? I will stop there, and then I will introduce the second session. If there are any questions, please do feel free to type in the chat. If you have any questions, we can always go back to the speakers, to Avni and Shruti, they'll be here. So now our second session is looking at transforming patriarchal masculinities. We're reflecting on ensuring gender transformative approaches to working with men and boys for transforming patriarchal masculinities and preventing GBV. So I will start with Torarina. I hope I pronounced your name very well, from the government of Iceland. If you can share a little bit about the work that Iceland and UN Women have a joint commitment on transforming masculinities. So if you can share a little bit about that work and your thoughts, I think, on the value and importance of using a gender transformative approach to working with men and boys, and what you see is some of the main challenges, I think, and the key strengths in using a gender transformative approach to transform patriarchal masculinities. So over to you, Torarina.
Easy questions that you're posing. So you're pronouncing my name correctly, but my nickname is Mimi, so you can call me Mimi. So I also just want to thank the previous speakers. It was really an interesting session, and I'm glad to see that the respect framework is being used, or I hope I understood it correctly, across the multilateral landscape, because I think it's very important also to include organizations such as the World Bank, because they are quite extensive also in this field. So on men and boys, engaging men and boys in the fight for gender equality is really, really important to Iceland, especially now when we are witnessing the backlash, as you were mentioning. And it's a very important part of our foreign policy and our development cooperation. And we also know that patriarchal masculinities and ideas of male superiority are a driver behind the root causes of inequality. But as they're manifested differently and sustained at multiple levels, addressing them requires an integrated and contextualized approach, and the combination of efforts among individuals, communities, governments, institutions, and organizations. This also means that we need to focus on structural drivers and systems which shape norms and behaviors, instead of only looking at men's behaviors and individual responsibility. And the core principles of the Generation Equality Forum and Iceland's approach as an action coalition leader on GBV reflect this very well. That is, keeping the focus on changing social and gender norms that foster unequal power relations, patriarchy, and harmful constructions of masculinity, while investing in and scaling up support geared towards this, with the aim to transform unequal power relations. And here I want to say it's very important to involve people of all genders, sexual orientation, and identities to fight patriarchy and address this toxic masculinity we are witnessing. And we also see that UN Women is uniquely placed to leverage this triple mandate on this topic, to work with men and boys and change stereotypes and transform masculinities and gender norms. Likewise, we see UN Women playing an important role in encouraging states to implement their commitments, and we have a lot of good existing treaty-based language on this. But having said this, of course, it's important to acknowledge this will require a long-term vision and commitment, and it will take a lot of time. And as co-leads of the Action Coalition, prevention is one of our key priorities, and both internationally and nationally here in Iceland. And we continue to support international organizations that work on prevention, such as UN Women and UNFPA. And we are also committed to prevention and combating GBV here in Iceland, which is still an issue. While we are, the most gender equal country in the world, we are still grappling with this problem. We have adopted an action plan on prevention of GBV. We have set up an emergency helpline and continue to implement our international commitments. And the government of Iceland and UN Women, they share a commitment to engage and work with men and boys as allies and stakeholders to address and prevent GBV. in line with the blueprint of the coalition and the Global Acceleration Plan. And Iceland, I just want to note it here, we are really committed to continue supporting young women in this area. And this includes us supporting a project which is being carried out in collaboration between several units within young women, and focuses on ending violence against women and prevention work with men and boys. And I think, or I hope, my colleague here from the MFA, who is seconded at the project with young women, is here online, because she will know every detail of the project if you want to ask any questions. I would not be able to do it, the challenges and the lessons learned. So the aim of the project is to generate knowledge, gather lessons learned, and enhance women's capacity to work on transforming patriarchal masculinities in a more informed, sustained, and a comprehensive manner. And while the primary focus is on ending violence against women, it's expected that we can use the results and methods to inform effects in other thematic areas and yield lessons learned that are valuable for young women in different areas. And in closing, I want to mention the barbershop toolkit. I don't know if any of you, maybe, unless maybe young women, are familiar with it. But it has been a successful resource, both for us here in the MFA, where it started, but also for young women in community mobilization and building male allyship and positive practices. And our partners have expressed a need to update it and incorporate policy insights from young women and make it more accessible and user-friendly. And we are very fully committed to supporting that work. And I think it's barbershop.is if you want to look it up, or you can maybe it's on the Young Women website. I'm not sure. I'm sorry, but it's a way to engage men in a positive atmosphere to talk about gender equality and what this means for them as well, how they see it. So over to you. I'm really happy to be able to have been here, but I have to drop off maybe in 10 minutes or so. So over to you, or maybe 5, sorry.
Okay.
Over.
Thank you so much for making the time and for being with us. And we're really grateful to the government of Iceland for supporting this work with UN Women. And I believe we are working with men engaged in that work. And we have tried to, depending, I think, on what we hear from participants, we do have an opening in the coming month to have a session to just focus on transforming masculinities, if this is something that may be needed. So can I just, from a practical perspective, maybe I can call on an example from Nigeria. If Chimezi, if you're in the room, from Equity Watch Initiative, just to share in about 3 or 5 minutes some of your reflections and the lessons you have learned on engaging men and boys to promote positive masculinity and reduce cultural barriers against women and girls in Nigeria. So if you can come in and share some of your reflections.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful for this opportunity. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are joining from. I'm so glad to be here in this call. My name is Chemeze Atama from Equity Watch Initiative, and we are based in the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Yes, sharing about gender transformative approach, masculinity. My starting point will be that we all know that the root cause of gender-based violence is patriarchy, traditional gender norms that have been perpetuated over the years, over the centuries, that has become part of us. And of course, without dealing with the root cause, we will not be able to address what is shooting out from the root. And so in our organization as Equity Watch Initiative, we have had that as part of our programs, knowing that we may not be able to achieve anything in equality. And of course, our major objective in the organization is to promote gender equality and empower women and girls. And so how can we achieve gender equality? How can we empower women and girls without engaging men and boys? And so it became central part of what we do. And in 2002, 2003, I was even the chair of Men Engage Nigeria, because we saw that given our situation, given the traditional gender norms, you cannot fight the men. There is nothing you can do. So what you have to do is to bring them as allies. And gender is something that whenever you talk about it, you find that even a sleeping professor will wake up. Our organization is based in the university, where you will imagine that people, especially professors at that high level, would be able to understand gender when you talk about. But just to mention the word gender, a professor who is sleeping will just wake up and be ready to fight you. And so we started talking to ourselves, what do we have to do? We have to bring these people, let them see from our perspective. Let us make them part of the process, because we also thought that, of course, in this space, we usually talk about engaging stakeholders in whatever we are doing. We need to engage stakeholders. And men and boys are stakeholders when we talk about GBV. So without engaging them properly, appropriately, we will not be able to achieve any result. And so we begin to talk about, first of all, yes, we know that patriarchy is the root cause. We know that traditional gender norms that have conditioned these men to think the way they are thinking is the issue. And the funny thing is that it's not even ending with the men. It has also conditioned us as women to begin to see what they are seeing as normal, to begin to take it that men should be dominating wherever we are, to take it that they should always show strength, to take it that they shouldn't show emotion, to take it that, and this thing is affecting everybody. It's not only affecting the women, it's affecting also the men. It affects their mental health, it takes away their peace, and also takes away the peace of the people around them. And so it must have to be mainstreamed into whatever work we are doing as GBV commitment makers. We may not be able to achieve anything without engaging them, especially in Africa, where the patriarchal system is so ingrained that you will not be able to, you cannot even come out without their permission. You cannot do anything without their permission. So we have to start letting them see from our perspective by engaging them, bringing them on the table. Let us have a dialogue. What all of us are looking out for is a just system, a just society that is free, that is fair to everyone. And if you're able to bring them to the table, have a conversation with them, let them see from our perspective, it will be better off. Because if you come out and start positioning as if you want to fight them, I have had a lot of experience where anytime you want to talk in the faculty, because I'm also a lecturer in the university, people will say, is the gender woman, So they will brand you, see you as an enemy, you are coming to fight them, and whatever you are saying will not be taken. And so we started approaching it from the that angle of engaging them, because that is the only way we can guarantee a sustained change. So far, we have been engaging traditional rulers, religious leaders, opinion leaders, whatever we are doing, be it menstrual health education, we have programs for the boys and the men, be it changing behavior change, we engage them, we engage women. Sometimes we even bring both gender on the table. And if you do that, you find that they tend to appreciate your work better than seeing you as an enemy, as somebody who is out to fight them, somebody else has come to change the status quo. So this is a few of what we are doing. A lot of things for us. For instance, right now, we are doing a prevention program that is called Empowerment Self-Defense. Empowerment Self-Defense talks about techniques that you can leverage on to empower girls to be able to respond to GBV, to be able to defend themselves, take care of themselves. So whenever they hear empowerment self-defense, what readily comes to their mind is that we are training girls to fight them. And so what we started doing is to make them part of what we are doing, let them appreciate what the empowerment self-defense is, so that they will not be able, they will stop seeing it from the perspective that we are coming to fight them. And in doing that, you find that entering point is also very important. How do you engage them? Because the thing is that even when you engage them, you want to engage them, it's a problem. It's a problem engaging them because you need to convince them why they need to be part of a system that want to change the position they have assumed, which they are enjoying. It's usually very difficult. And so entry point becomes very important. So usually we don't go to the men as husbands. We go to them as fathers. We go to them as brothers, people, because they are concerned about their daughters, they are concerned about their sisters, but some of them are not concerned about their wives. So we usually leave the aspect of the husband and say, come to us, how can you protect your daughter? How will you be able to protect your sister? What do you do so that your sister will not be raped, so that your sister will not be harassed, so that your daughter will not? And if you go from that entry point, it usually makes sense to them. So a number of things that we are doing down here. I have only 5 minutes and I think I still have some questions. I don't know if I should stop here.
Thank you so much, James. I think we will come back if we have any questions. And again, as I said, we really want to give a whole session just to speak about masculinities. And I think one of the powerful things and the entry points are key. How do you approach them and how do you get into that space? Can I just ask the participants if you have any questions on this, if you just note down your questions, and then we move to the next session in the interest of time. So the next session is on mainstreaming GBV prevention efforts in different sectors. As we know, there are different sectors where we are all working in. And now we move to India. If I can invite Prita to come through. So we do know that Breakthrough, and she's from Breakthrough, one of the leaders of the Action Coalition on GBV. Do know that Breakthrough has been doing some groundbreaking work on preventing GBV within the education sector in India. So maybe Prita, if you could share with us the broad framework of your intervention within the school system, and again, what were some of the key entry points you used to enter the space? Because we know when it comes to children in school age, there's the issue around consent and disturbing young children. So what were some of the key entry points you used to enter the space, and some of the lessons I think you got from that and noted as crucial to preventing violence within the education space? So over to you, Prita.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Maureen. And it was great to hear my previous speakers. My name is Prita, and I lead the work on global positioning in Breakthrough, and we are an organization. We work out of 6 states in India. So next slide, please. So like the earlier speakers have already mentioned, that violence prevention at scale can be very challenging, and we have already heard about the different evidence that is emerging and the different learnings from different parts of the world. So for Breakthrough, our mission is to make gender-based violence, particularly violence and discrimination against women and girls, unacceptable by transforming the culture that permits violence. And for making this happen, our work focuses on working with adolescents and young people. And our direct implementation work, which we call as the deep transformation work, follows a socio-ecological model where we work with adolescents as well as the communities, because communities where the power holders of the society resides, as parents, teachers, panchayat raj institutions, so different stakeholders across 13 districts and over 800 villages. So, you know, Maureen, what you asked at what has been the entry point. So the deep transformation work is actually the sandbox or the experimentation work for actually graduating to the systems change work. So Breakthrough, in order to enable a generational shift, we use a lot of popular culture, media campaigns, etc., along with the gender equity curriculum that we implement at the schools through the teachers and principals, and we take classes in the schools for the adolescents and young people. What happened was, if we can go to the next slide, When we did this work over 4 states in India, these are the kind of evidences that were emerging from our work. For example, when we see that one adolescent who goes through 2 years of our gender equity program or curriculum in school, there is certain kind of behavioral shifts and change in attitudes that you can see. For example, children from the most regressive gender attitude, behavior and families would kind of shift to showing more progressive behavior once they have completed this 2 years of curriculum. So for us, the entry point for making change happen is this class-based lectures and the curriculum. So, you know, when we talk about working in schools, we have to get the consent of the teachers and the principal and the school administrators. That is where we ensure that the safeguarding aspect is adequately taken care of. In between all this, COVID had happened, and that has been a deterrent to the work. But in spite of that, you know, we have seen that when we were delivering the classes through online or through phone, there have been significant shifts. For example, in Uttar Pradesh, which is one of the most bottom states in terms of gender indicators, has actually shown that girls' age at marriage has increased by nearly 2 years. And there has been a 17% increase in adolescent girls accessing health services. Now, in the context of India, all these situations are very, very challenging. The other thing that we noticed has happened in the 4 states that we were working was that there was an increase and there was a general happening of intergenerational dialogue, because in India, because of the cultural restraints and because of a patriarchal norm, children do not talk freely to their parents, and especially the fathers. But because of the curriculum and where it encourages children to talk to their parents, talk to their elders, talk to more powerful members of the community, the intergenerational dialogue had increased by almost 17%. And all these evaluations were done by independent organizations, not by Breakthrough. So we had taken this body of evidence to 2 state governments, and we had presented it to them, and they had asked us as what will be the roadmap, you know, if we are talking about gender transformative school systems, how do Breakthrough see the roadmap as happening and as evolving. So next slide. So for us, the gender transformative education system, this program is currently happening in 2 states. And the way or the pathway towards doing is that we will be training around 66,000 teachers, and we will be also sensitizing state and district officials. So this is where, so state and district officials actually monitor the school administration system. That is why they are also important to us. And by the end of the program, by 2028, we hope to impact around 4 million adolescents. And we are hoping that we will be able to document evidence that 1.6 to 1.8 million adolescents out of this 4 million will be showing gender progressive attitudes, thinking, perception, and behavior. And we are thinking that once we have the evidence in place from these 2 states, we will be actually advocating for a nationwide gender transformative school system that, you know, if you want to build a better gender equal tomorrow, this is the roadmap for doing that. And you can work with different stakeholders, where the government is, of course, the major stakeholder in this case. Now for Breakthrough, next slide, please. What does a gender transformative school system look like, you know? So these are some of the indicators that we have listed, and this is what we will be evaluating at the end of 2027 and beginning of 2028, that where we will see that whether adolescent girls will have agency to ask more questions in class, because like you know, in India, it's very common for boys to raise their hands and ask questions, but girls are generally not given that kind of a space, or they are not encouraged to ask questions, more like passive listeners and learners. All genders will learn to have intergender and intergenerational conversations. Teachers will actually explore their own biasness and bring about gender equitable behavior in the classrooms. And finally, state leadership or the government will support school leaders and teachers. Now, what we have really done to ensure this is that within the curriculum, within certain subjects like economics, geography, history, we have integrated gender and gender in through illustrations into the curriculum. So that's the way we have done it, through curriculum integration. Next slide, please. Okay, so it's a really detailed slide, but just to give you what it entails is that we are looking at evidence to show that how do we claim that violence prevention at scale is possible. So these are the three kind of frameworks that we are using in these two states. One, which is the basic model, is what I already shared with you all. It's through curriculum integration, content creation, teacher training, administration, supervision, etc. Now, the next model, which is the plus plus model, is something that we are trying to see that if there are an additional layer, which is like intervening with middle level administration in the education system, does it give a different and quicker kind of an impact? So that's the plus plus model. So we are going to evaluate it against the basic. And then we are also looking at a randomized control trial. This is more like a research intensive kind of a technique where we are giving additional nudges through regular meetings and WhatsApp messaging on gender and education to the teachers, again to see whether the impact of these additional nudges will bring in quicker outcomes. So these are the three kind of evidence generating frameworks that we are going to work on over the next 2 years, and by 2028 hopefully we are going to have a rich body of evidence to show whether these different types of framework work out or not. I think the last slide, this is actually the vision of the scale up model that we are trying to work on, from being gender unintended to gender intentionalized or gender transformative. And what does it mean at different levels? And like I said, that it's not only at the school level, but also working with the schools, school system, administrators, parents, through different mechanisms and different kind of interventions. So I'll stop here, and if there are questions, if there are comments, I can take it. Thanks, Molly.
Okay, many thanks, Prita, and we'll definitely be following that conversation in terms of the learnings, the three models that you are using. And I'm really glad that, you know, some of the indicators you're already seeing an increase in the age of marriage of young girls, because that is associated with other positive indicators, reduced maternal mortality, child mortality, and I think a positive impact also on GBV prevention. So we can now move. Please, if you do have any questions, even if you think of them afterwards, please do type in your questions. We can always go back to Prita, and then we can always come back. And as I said, this session will also be on the discussion board briefly, and then we can still come in with more questions and more responses in case you think of questions later on. If we're moving on to the health sector, if I can ask Avni to come back from the WHO. Again, we do know that GBV has long been recognized as a major issue within the health sector. And we know that WHO has been involved in various efforts to help and promote prevention of GBV against women and girls in the health sector. So maybe can you share some of the work that you have done, and what are some of the key learnings that have emerged about preventing GBV within the health sector, within the work that you do? So over to you, Avni.
Thank you, Moline. So I'll just share some reflections at a very macro level of how we have systematically tried to integrate GBV prevention and response in the health sector, and some reflections from our work globally. I think one of the first things to say, what has enabled us to really advocate for the health sector to address GBV. One of them, not in the same order, but I'll just say one of them, is that we actually have a political mandate through our governing bodies. And we have a resolution at the World Health Assembly that all the ministries of health have endorsed, a plan of action on how to strengthen the health system's response in preventing and responding to violence against women and girls. So, and we have an accountability framework. So it isn't just, oh yes, this is a great grand plan, but also we are required to report back on progress made by ministries and by partners and by us on how we are doing it through the health systems. And we have a set of indicators that we are tracking to see how health policies are actually integrating GBV into their substantive content of the policy. So in some ways, that is maybe one of the first lessons to offer, is that it is important to have some sort of a political policy mandate that enables you to advocate and hold people accountable for this. A second learning, of course, has been the power of what I call the power of evidence. And for us, having the public health burden of prevalence of violence against women, the famous 1 in 3 figure that everybody attributes to WHO, and the fact that now we have estimates for 161 countries, and we are producing these estimates for SDG 5.2 monitoring on a regular basis. And we can show to countries that it isn't just something that is out there in some other country, but it actually very much is a problem in your country. And not only that it is a human rights and gender equality issue, but it's actually making a huge difference to your bottom line, which is if you care about achieving the SDGs on health, then you have to actually address the SDG 5.2 on GBV, because without that, you cannot actually improve your health outcomes. And that has been an argument that has helped us in some of the most challenging contexts, including in our Eastern Mediterranean region, where the human rights and gender equality argument often gets pushed back as a Western notion. But what ends up happening is that we are able to actually showcase the public health burden and the health impacts on not just the population, but also where there is economic impacts on the government's GDP. We are able to actually show, look, this is an issue that you have to take seriously, and it's not just about foreign notions of human rights, but this is a problem in your country. So having this evidence has been quite helpful in integration and mainstreaming into the health sector. The third thing that I think lesson learned for us and that I can share with you is having normative standards for the health sector to prevent and respond to violence against women. I think it's one thing to say, okay, you have a problem, but then when you finally get everybody on board to say, okay, the health sector, we recognize this is a problem, then they ask us, well, what do you advise we do? And that's where the power of having these norms and standards and saying, look, this is what we are advising, and these are evidence-based standards for the health sector to respond to violence against women, to prevent and respond to violence against women, has been extremely helpful for us in making the case from saying this is a problem, from recognizing it's a problem, to actually being more solutions oriented and taking responsibility for the health sector. And we went beyond just producing these norms and standards. What we did was we produced a whole set of very practical tools, very, very practical tools for the health sector to address violence against women. And it was really because we decided that there's no point just telling people about the very theoretical level of, this is a problem and gender needs to be taken into account. We actually had to demonstrate and build their competencies and skills on how to address these in their day-to-day routine work, because that's where we need to really make those micro changes in how they respond to violence against women. So that's another area where we really paid a lot of attention to, and we have a whole bunch of e-learnings, quality assurance tools, training manuals, etc. I think the next thing we'd really made a concerted effort is really to not just have these nice standards, nice tools, nice evidence, everything that is good on paper, but we started working with our regional and country offices and with UN partners to start supporting countries to implement these guidelines and tools and building capacities, not just of WHO staff, but also of our partners, and working with civil society to make sure that these capacities were embedded not in individuals only, but in institutions in these countries. So we worked with ministries of health, we worked with medical schools, nursing schools, midwifery schools. We're working with local public health universities to really think about how a public health approach to prevention and response can be implemented. And we are working at this point, we have 73 countries that have reported using our guidelines and 23 who are actually in crisis context who are implementing a specific initiative on GBV in health emergencies that we've been proactively supporting. And we've developed a very systematic process to support these countries to implement these tools and guidelines, where we don't just raise awareness and sensitize policymakers, but we adapt them to national context, these materials. We train trainers, we train health providers, we train health professionals, and after that, we really emphasize the monitoring of quality and quality of implementation. So we have developed this framework that allows countries to say, if I need to start, how do I do this? What is the methodology? How can I evaluate and learn from it at a pilot level before I go to scale? So give you an example, this is in India. We've done this piloting and testing in one state of Maharashtra with 3 hospitals, where we trained health workers, 200 of them, and we monitored their improvements in quality services, as well as their knowledge and attitudes and practices of how they were delivering services. And we saw that 500 women actually reported and were supported to receive care over a period of 9 months. And we did this in a very systematic way, where not only did we do the research, but we did it through a collaboration between a feminist NGO and a public sector government hospital. And we showed that, a patriarchal health system mindset can be changed through careful adaptation to roles and responsibilities and considering what is feasible. So not to throw the kitchen sink at the hospital facilities that are overstretched, but to be very pragmatic on what they can start and how that shift in mindset can happen over time in the health system itself. And now, we are working, as I said, in many humanitarian settings. This is in Sudan, where we've been doing a similar approach, training doctors, making sure that mobile clinics are available, providing services to survivors of rape. Similarly, in Nigeria, we are actually working in the 3 states that are affected by the crises, improving qualities of health services, training partners, NGOs, CSOs, as well as the Ministry of Health and the public sector doctors, and making sure that there is not just what we call parachute approach to capacity building, but there is local institutional capacities to deliver this care and to mainstream and sustain a response after in the long term. Similarly, here in Ukraine, you can see we've been working with local health providers. We're also we're translating materials into local languages. We're working with the Ministry of Health to change and update their legal frameworks to make sure that they are reaching survivors in a much more accessible and friendly way, so that the law doesn't become a barrier to actually survivors getting access to services. And what we are learning from all of this is that it's important to be in for the long haul. Really, the importance of a long-term perspective for institutionalization and mainstreaming of GBV into the health systems, making sure that we're focused on adult learning, competency-based, skill-based training, peer-led training and capacity building, cultivating champions and senior management champions within the health systems at the highest level, which has been extremely crucial for us to get support for this. And then really also getting into the nuts and bolts of health systems strengthening, which is infrastructure, making sure that they have protocols in the local languages, that the HMIS, the documentation systems are there to document cases and track progress over time, that we are providing IEC materials and job aids in those health facilities to increase the visibility and awareness of the people who are coming in to understand, that they can speak about violence, they can perhaps get referrals for their problems, they can perhaps get help for counseling and through that reduce violence. And also building a multi-sectoral architecture so that we are not just working with the health sector, but also building cross-referral linkages with the police, the justice, the civil society, feminist groups on the ground. And perhaps maybe just leave you with this wisdom. As I said, one has to be in it for the long haul, because we've realized this is documenting almost 10, 15 years of work and lessons learned. So institutional change like this takes time, and you really have to stop sort of thinking programmatically and thinking about strengthening health systems as an institution, as a patriarchal institution whose mindset has to be changed, not just of people who work in there, but of the architecture of the health systems itself. Over.
Thank you so much, Avni. And I think it's very powerful what you're indicating at the end, that it's all about transforming the system as opposed to people that work, because people come and go and they change too, but transforming the health system itself. If I can just ask if you can indulge us just to stay for an extra 10 minutes and we finish at 22. I just have two last speakers. If I can call Suvi from the International Solidarity Foundation to just say some of the work you've been doing in Kenya and in Somalia, working with traditional leaders and also training traditional leaders, and also in schools around reduction of FGM. If you can come in for about 3 to 5 minutes, please, that would be great. So I don't know if Suvi is in the house.
Hi,
oh yeah, there we go. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity to reflect, and thank you for the wonderful presentations. Yes, we work with the International Solidarity Foundation. We work in the Horn of Africa, in Somaliland, in Western Kenya, and also actually now in Ethiopia, in the Somali region. I was very interested in hearing about, well, both education and health are some of the sectors where we work, and to quickly reflect on something I thought in the education context, what was very similar that we've seen is also the reduction of child marriage, boys' engagement, and promoting positive masculinities has been something that has been given as a feedback that we should actually approach more in our programs. And the intergenerational approach was very interesting to hear, and that it has been so effective, because that's actually something that will be sort of mainstreaming in our Ethiopian program in the future years. What I wanted to say that I thought what is very interesting, because we've done similar things in Kenya where we work with the extra curriculum program, and we establish school clubs in prevention of FGM. We also have noticed that the most likely time for the girls to be cut is always during the school holidays. So how to replace those sort of momentums and give safe spaces for girls is something that we've been seeing as a successful thing, is the ARP, so alternative rites of passage camps for the girls during the holiday seasons. And then on the medicalization, first thing I wanted to echo is absolutely the strengthening of the healthcare workers' accountability, and also in the infrastructure that is usually quite poor in some of the areas, at least where we work. And what was very interesting on Avni's presentation was that reframing gender rights as a health right was seen as something effective. And to be honest, with the context of FGM, we've seen something reverse, unfortunately. There's been a huge spike in the medicalization of FGM in both Kenya and in Somali context. And this is really important because FGM is prevalent for different reasons. In Kenya, the cutting is seen as a rite of passage for girls to become women. And in the rural communities in the Somali context, FGM is understood as a religious demand to control girls' piety and sexuality. And despite the different root causes, the medicalization is seen as a trend now. And it's seen as a justification and safer for the girls to go through it in medicalized settings instead of the traditional ones. It provides new means to earn money and sort of creates niches for registrations on licensed practitioners, for example, now in the case of Ethiopia. And we've seen that some of the religious leaders are even now promoting the medicalization of FGM, especially in Ethiopia, because this is seen as a modern way to continue the ancient practice. So I think all in all, I mean, the working, for example, together with the religious leaders has been very effective in Somaliland. But I think what we have to really, based on all the evidences that we are seeing, is to really focus on how to work together with the health sector and the religious leaders at the same time and sort of harmonize the message and the approaches on FGM. Thank you.
Your screen, your messages, if you can stop sharing. So lastly, our last presenter, I think we invite Daniela Warren to speak about GBV prevention within the media. And this has been happening in North America. Johanna, if you can stop sharing your screen. So Daniela, I think you can come in. We do know that the Aura Freedoms GBV in the media project that you worked on in Toronto has achieved, has really been quite a success, and you have worked with some of the strong feminists in Toronto. Maybe you can share around, some of the resources that you used within that work and how transforming the media can impact GBV prevention. So over to you, Daniela, if you're in.
Yes, I think someone is sharing the screen. I don't know who it is. Okay.
Okay. There we go. So over to you, Daniela.
Sounds great. Thank you, everyone. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Danielle, and I am the manager of programs and development at Aura Freedom. We're a small grassroots organization based in Canada that engages in advocacy, knowledge exchange, training and research, survivor support, policy change, and more to prevent and eradicate gender-based violence. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity and to hear from other efforts across the globe. Our effort in particular is to really speak to a transformative initiative at Aura Freedom called GBV in the media. So I know I can't speak to the entire scope of the initiative, but before sort of speaking to it, I'd like to just share the website that has, all of our resources, all of the research that we've done, and everything there. So I'll share that as well here. Okay, perfect. So our intended impact at Aura Freedom and with the GBV in the Media initiative was essentially to change the way that GBV is portrayed in the media and create systemic change as a result. We did so by first conducting a research background and literature review on GBV portrayal with a Canadian context. So we did one generally and one specific to Indigenous experiences. So this really supported us in pulling out general thematic themes, so voices, language, frameworks, and impacts. We then fostered and nurtured a national network. So it was stakeholders from across Canada. And those were both feminist GBV experts as well as media experts. So we essentially intentionally joined the sectors together. And so what we did as a result was create national guidelines for reporting on GBV in the media in Canada and a series of other resources to support implementation of these guidelines. So we were funded by the federal government in this phase, but we are looking for further funding to conduct our next phase of this research. The intentionality around tackling the media sector is really because we have seen so often historically that gender-based violence has been misrepresented, underreported, and very much silenced by the media. So intentionally or not, media sources often play into harmful stereotypes or misconceptions and might not always prioritize the safety of survivors or the prevention of GBV. So we work from two key understandings around media and its frameworks. We recognize that media is often seen as an authoritative voice, one that often both echoes and contributes to social understanding of issues, especially for the everyday person who isn't working in GBV. And those are key individuals when we're looking to prevent GBV, right? So we're looking to educate those who don't have that knowledge of GBV. And additionally, these voices are heard and seen by survivors as well. So we know that, as a survivor of GBV myself, media really influences our own experiences and our own understanding of our experiences, as well as our understanding of how the world perceives our experiences to be. So the other sort of key understanding is that we recognize that media often approaches using a pseudo-neutral framework. And we know that neutrality as a whole favors the side of the oppressor. So this is an important shift within media that has to happen to create systemic change. So in the same way, media is often very incidental, right? So it's based off specific instances of an event. It centers chosen facts at the hands of one particular instance and does not historically bring in that greater context of the human rights crisis of GBV. So some of the learnings that we sort of took with us is that media experts we've connected with agree that systemic change must occur. So they've often called for guidelines to be put in the hands of decision makers and upper management in media. So this needs to be included in training inherent in media spaces and has to be prioritized by those in charge. This also calls into another learning that we worked with, which is that if we want change in the media to occur, we must call media individuals in. So I think it's similar to how we've sort of reframed and reworked with recognizing that we have to call in men and boys to do GBV work. Similarly, we must call in those who are often the voices for what happens in our time. So although we've historically been harmed, survivors and GBV sector has historically been harmed by media individuals and media stories, I think often we've often called media out. And so we need to create that change of calling them in. So this leads to what we've heard from some of the media experts, which is that they want to do better. They want to write better articles and pieces, but they don't know how. So we've heard from media professionals that truly felt that they were writing feminist, progressive works. And even those individuals learned quite a bit about how to further transform their work with the GBV context through this project. So we learned about the conditions as well that many professionals in media have to work in. And ones that we heard from GBV experts as well is that GBV efforts historically have, one, called out media and also made suggestions from called out media and made suggestions from a GBV context. When the true sort of change that we want to occur, and if we want change to occur, we also need to work with media professionals so that our suggestions, our recommendations, and our projects and programs to influence media actually works with the media structure. So if we do want to change and see change occur in our lifetimes, we need to understand the media environment, the media culture, and the media system. So similar to how many oppressive systems such as justice need to be broken down before they can be rebuilt better, we at the same time as we're doing that work to reimagine structures, we need to work to make sure that there's change happening within the current structure in place and systems in place. So in terms of resources, the national network and parallel Indigenous national network that we've created was made up of GBV and media experts. Although the project has ended its first phase, we've seen that these GBV experts really are continuing to champion these guidelines. And at the same time, the media experts are doing the same. So we're seeing that media experts are actually taking these guidelines and creating change within their own media spaces. So we created this national network to create systemic change. They also influenced our national guidelines. We conducted a research and literature background as another resource. And then we created additional resources for media professionals. So for example, we created a journalist scorecard, and that supports usage of our guidelines on GBV in the media. And so the website that I put in the chat there is the microsite to house all of our resources on all of our tools. In terms of what we've seen so far, the national network itself was a huge achievement and contributor to systemic change. We've seen that GBV and media sectors have historically had a very contentious and conflictual relationship. This network has created partnerships and developed relationships between media and GBV stakeholders that are going to contribute to systemic change going forward. We've also seen media experts create systemic change within their own spaces. We've seen that the online website, for example, and our social media around this project has reached, within the first month of after launch, about 26,000 online. And we've also heard from survivors from GBV and media stakeholders within and outside our network about the impacts of this work. So we're seeing that this set of guidelines has actually been taken into media spaces. We've seen policy changes as a result of this work, and we've seen essentially different changes happening within individual pieces as well as within the structure of media spaces in Canada as a result of the implementation of these works. In terms of sort of going forward and key considerations to advise any other work that's happening in media and with the context of GBV, I would say that we are looking to call media in and not always call them out, and find champions within the media sector to partner with and create projects with. So this is essentially what we're looking to conduct in phase 2, but we also recognize that we can't just create the resources for media professionals. We also need to create media resources that foster implementation, and then we need to pilot these resources. We need to ensure that, these guidelines, for example, are not just sitting on a shelf somewhere in an office, and that they're actually being used. We also need to identify ways that the culture and the system of media itself needs to be changed. So essentially reimagining that culture and that system of media, and at the same time identify ways that we can improve and better the system of media at hand in order to optimize prevention efforts. We also recognize that systemic change must occur where people have power. We know these oppressive systems trickle down, and that often the onus is on those with little power in media systems. So this shift must occur at the heads of media. It must occur where decision makers are at the table, and essentially ensuring that all of our work, as we do, is survivor-led, reflects diverse intersectional survivor experiences, and that is an aspect of the work intentionally done at Aura Freedom. So that is everything from us.
Thank you so much. Really, I know this was information overload. There was a lot to speak about, and I do hope we're going to put this on the discussion board, and we'll still open this up for more discussions. And I think one very key takeaway I think that I'm getting from the speakers, particularly from what Avni mentioned, that within the health sector, they would ask, if you do want us to change or prevent GBV, how do we do it? So the how question, and again in the media, that coming out how, rather than us just, programming, coming up with the programs, but we do need to at least explain some of the things that we know within the sector, within the eval ecosystem. It's not always as obvious in the different sectors. And again, the same thing has come up with, particularly around gender budgeting, budgeting for GBV or budgeting for gender within finance ministries. They always come back to say, how do we do it? How do we program? How do we develop a program for gender? So it's very important as we do the work that we take cognizant of the how do we do this and what are we proposing, and then actually piloting it within the different sectors that we're working in or within the communities. So Thank you so much, and thank you for staying along for an extra 15 minutes. I think in the next session, I'll try to have less speakers so that we can also interact some more. But I hope you have learned. And Danielle, maybe if you can share, all the panelists, if you can share some of your notes and your presentations, and then we can share this with everyone and also with any email addresses. If you need to get in touch, part of what we want to do as the Action Coalition is to present this space as a space where you can collaborate, you can engage with any of the organizations that are here. If there's some interesting work that you have seen that you want to collaborate and work with them, this is what this space and platform is all about. So we will be sharing the notes, we'll be sharing everything in the presentations. If you feel you want us to facilitate, or you can just get in touch with any of the panelists, and we can, all of us, I think what we're trying to do is to empower women and girls and reduce, eliminate gender-based violence in all the different spaces, in all our spaces where we're working. Thank you so much for staying on for an extra 15 minutes. And this was really great. I've learned a lot, and I'll be sharing all this. Thank you so much. I hope you all enjoyed. And I think on the last question, I got 4 or 5 responses, and we'll be coming back. I think for the next session, we'll be having a facilitator who will be helping us. So I think we'll try and have like a focus group discussion or so beforehand to just discuss what is it that you want to learn, and what are the areas that you want to understand more, so that we make the next learning session, learning circle, as informative and as useful for you as possible. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't know if you can put in your screens and we can take a picture of everyone that was there today. I know we've missed a lot of them, but I can take some that are there, and I hope Johanna was taking pictures before of everyone that was there, that was here.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you
We
so
enjoyed
much.
the.
All right. Thank you so much. Goodbye. Have a lovely afternoon and a lovely morning and a lovely
And
evening.
Shruti, hi, Shruti.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Abdul.
How are you?
Good. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.